Hmm.
No, another weird thing that's happening, Ted, with soybeans is soy is a really good feed for hogs. And normally, or at least since COVID, the hog market just exploded. People were just bacon obsessed. Everything was bacon, 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 bacon. And so, and it went on for a long time. But all of a sudden, the pork market has just collapsed,
Really?
which is weird because the beef market's at an all-time high.
I'm high.
Yeah, people are paying
Yeah.
ridiculous amounts of money for beef and they're not even complaining about it. They just keep buying the beef and it keeps going up and the supply continues to be very limited. Whereas pork is down there, that's practically going to be as cheap as chicken at some point. But it's a good opportunity to use all that cheap soybeans to grow some cheap hogs.
Yeah.
But strangely, the American appetite seems to be tired of bacon. So it's a weird time. Every market's it's really, really odd.
Hmm.
We have the same situation with sorghum that we have with soys. We primarily grow that for animal feed and we primarily export it to China. It's a big crop, particularly in drought areas and in areas that have sort of low quality soil, parts of Texas and Oklahoma. They grow sorghum, Kansas, but China's not buying sorghum either.
Hmm. I didn't know that about sorghum. I knew that about soy and beef.
Yeah.
Everybody.
Hi, Bob.
So, Laura, did you get someone get my PDF? I don't know how to do share screen. I'm a little inept here. I need to figure out how to channel my inner 8-year-old.
Yeah. So oddly, Bob or Tim was able to forward it to me, but I did not receive yours.
And I didn't get it either, Bob.
But you got it, Tim?
I did.
Okay, so
we've got it.
okay. All right, one of my goals in life will be after this call to learn how to do a share screen. But thank you.
Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? Appreciate everybody joining us today. I'm just going to make a couple of opening comments and then we'll move on to the rest of our program. And I've been traveling around the country a lot lately and speaking at a variety of events and actually collaborated for about a month with Bloomberg on an article that was just published last week on what's happening in the farm world, which is to me, it's like being back in the 80s again, but this time we have the wisdom to know what's ahead of us. And unfortunately, that wisdom isn't helping us very much because we can't seem to stop this slow train wreck that we're heading towards in agriculture. We were just talking a minute ago about soybeans. We've farmers grew a lot less soybeans this year. There was kind of a pretty equal agreement that China was going to cut back on buying soybeans. And so if you drive around here in the great state of Illinois, you don't see a lot of soybeans, at least not nearly as many as you saw just a couple of years ago, but you see a lot of corn. And I remember back in April, we had a meeting with a bunch of farmers from across the country. And I said, why the heck are you growing so much corn? And, the answer is that even though it was going to be, probably pretty cheap, at least they knew there were buyers for it. And those buyers were really going to be cattle producers and ethanol producers. It was not so much about the export market, although they were hopeful for that. But what we're really looking at now is the fact that we've had probably the best corn production year we've ever seen. There's a few things that have slowed that down a little bit, mainly the droughts that we're seeing across parts of the Midwest, including here in Illinois. I think Will County is still one of the driest places in the state of Illinois. And so that's having some effect on yield. But for the most part, I think that everybody will universally agree by the end of this season that we grew the best corn crop we have ever done in the United States, which normally we'd feel great about. we don't feel so great about it this year because not only do we have grain bins that are full from last year's crops, we don't have a buyer for most of that crop. And so we're going to be facing a lot more questions rather than, or just simply, not just simply who we're going to sell it to, but how are we going to store all of this grain? We can store soybeans in bio bags, but the problem is those bio bags come from China and they currently have 100% tariff sitting on top of them. So there's not a whole lot of willingness to spend that money. And so I think one of the biggest stories of next year is going to be that overabundance. And, should we be planting more corn and more soy when we're sitting on probably 2 years of capacity? I think overproduction is the word I'm hearing a lot among our friends at USDA right now. There's also the problem of the massive increase in inputs, the prices of inputs, and that has a lot to do with exports, believe it or not. So when you fill up a barge full of corn on the Illinois River and you send it down the Mississippi and you send that over to China, it usually comes back filled with fertilizer or some other input, potash or something else that's used by the U.S. Ag industry. But now they're sending those things to us and they're returning back empty, which significantly increases costs. So farmers who would normally start buying their inputs, fertilizers and other chemicals this time of year, are seeing incredibly high bills for that. And some of them are choosing not to buy. You all probably know enough to know that corn requires at least 1 pound of nitrogen, whereas soybeans, they produce their own nitrogen. They take the nitrogen out of the air. They take the nitrogen that they find in the soil. You don't really have to add nitrogen. So I'm going to predict that we're going to see a lot of beans next year. I also predict that if CRP is still standing, you're going to see a lot of acres put aside. We're going to see fallow fields next year because it may be better for farmers to take a government payment for them not to farm than to take the risk of growing something that has no buyer for a third year in a row. Now, I know I sound like just a bundle of joy and optimism, and I never want to be that way. But this is an extraordinary time, and there are a lot of people that are pushing the White House to make decisions and to support farmers. President Trump has said that he is going to help farmers out with payments from his tariffs. Well, he actually can't do that. That's not possible. And farmers know that he can't be paid that way, or they can't be paid that way. They have to be paid through a system at USDA, which is very likely not to happen soon enough. It's very doubtful that farmers are going to see payments this fall. My prediction is they're going to see it during the midterm primaries in the spring, or as late as this time next year before the final primary season, which is going to make things really, really hard. We're starting to see layoffs across the industry, particularly in the equipment builders. So all of this is to say, we're in tough times, but we're looking at tougher times ahead of us. So what are the opportunities in that? And the opportunities really lie in the things we've been discussing here in the Chicago Wilderness Ag Initiative, and that's diversification. We have to help our farmers on this diversification trail because there are things that they can grow. We know that they need infrastructure and they need markets, but I think that the one thing Chicago has done really well since COVID is develop a new food system where more and more we're feeding ourselves. We're not relying on imports. I don't know if you all saw the report, but for the first time ever, our imports of fruits and vegetables exceeded our exports. Which is a pretty extraordinary thing to happen in the US. We have never been dependent on foreign imports of food. We are now in that position, but I'm pretty happy to say Chicago is not in as much of a difficult position as other areas because of the development of this local food system. And I would say now more than ever, it is essential that we invest in that system and we invest in infrastructure. Thank you. And that we invest in some of these key areas. These are the areas that my organization is working in right now, Farm Foundation. I will say too, if you work with farmers and they're struggling, we do have something called the Farm Family Wellness Alliance that provides unlimited mental health and other support services to all farm families in America at no cost. So if you know farmers that need some support, I highly recommend you refer them to the Farm Family Wellness Alliance. It takes all of 30 seconds to sign up, and it's completely anonymous, and it literally saves lives. We're going to be shifting our focus more on rural vitality as well. We're very concerned about rural communities, particularly in these kinds of downturns. Those of you that may have grown up in an area like I did saw how devastating the 1980s were to small communities. And so we're predicting the same, but there are opportunities for those communities to develop in other ways. Market and development and access is really about those trade deals. It's about diversification. It's about opening new markets. Conservation and sustainability. We all, I think, are pretty worried about that right now. We're worried about USDA's willingness to continue to pay for conservation programs. As you know, there were some massive cuts. Some of that is coming back. Some of those farm to school programs have been invested in, although at a fraction of what they were before. But we, again, have to keep up the pressure on both our state legislatures and our national folks to not back away on these conservation programs. And quite frankly, they're needed more during downturn times than during the good times. And then technology. We can't deny the role of AI and automation. I spend a lot of my time on this. I just got invited to speak at a national conference on AI, and I had a bit of a panic. As much as I read about it and talk about it, I feel like AI and automation are moving faster than I can keep up with. But because of the situation that we have with farm workers, but also just simply cutting costs and automating, you're going to hear a ton about automation and AI in the next year. So I'm going to turn it over now to Bob to talk sort of more in depth about this strategy for supporting our local farmers and building out the Chicago food system, which he has brilliantly called Good Food for All. So Bob, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Tim. So who's running my slides here?
I think Laura is.
Okay, thanks, Laura.
Actually, Ted, I inserted them into the presentation.
Oh, you
Thank
did? Okay.
Oh.
I will pull them back up then. Sorry.
No problem.
All right, so, okay. All right, cool. All right, thank you. Thanks, Tim. That was a fantastic overview. And again, what I really love about this group is how my 35 years as an independent reporter, independent consultant, trying to move forward, really about strengthening regional ag economies. This is sort of the vision of how nature conservation can work with both community-centered and commercial-scale agriculture. I think is really smart, and we just have to figure out how to move it forward. Next slide, please. So, one of my mentors in this whole field, a woman named Ann Hughes, she died 4 years ago. I hadn't spoken to her probably in 20 years. She would be so into this group. She was a farmer. She and she married into the Hughes farm family. They owned, I don't know, the seed corn just west of Route 47 in central McHenry County. She got involved in as a parent on the school board, and we got no development west of 47, and gradually learned things are complicated. Wound up getting elected to the Will County Board, first female board chair in northeastern Illinois, and then an Illinois state rep. Was very active with a growth management effort that was happening in the late 1990s for representing the Illinois Farm Bureau and all that. And so I'd interviewed her for here. These quotes are from a presentation. Well, it was from a report, a USDA report. And what really hold on a minute. What really struck me is there's just so much parallel. So what the real problem that we're dealing with that Tim is speaking to is that we have the federal resource delivery system is all of a sudden in a state of collapse, and what the project that I'm envisioning here is to reimagine the public resource delivery system with a community-driven, good food for all solution as the starting point. It's almost like we need to galvanize local partnerships, build build that to scale, and bring it into alignment with the federal resource delivery system that's been in place since Abraham Lincoln dreamt up this USDA back in 1862. So Ann Hughes, it was so remarkable. I mean, again, it just sort of speaks to the need of what we've been talking about with the Growing with Ag committee for a number of years. And she said, people like to look at farmland. You just don't have the kind of comprehensive conversations. Everyone's coming at it from their particular narrow view. And she said, well, people like to look at farmland. And I actually think that in the last 20 years, the sort of the romantic look at the corn or the soybean field, that's actually been diminished because the demand for local food, the demand for alternatives, it's really made big ag and big farmers, yeah, the global food supply chain, a demon rather than a partner. We just in the last couple of months have been talking with people around climate action, and they're looking at the putting in the solar panels all over suburbia, and they don't see any downside to like removing all that productive farm ground. Another thing that Ann had said, I didn't include it in this quote here, was that commodity growers are locked into a system that can't survive without federal support. And that's exactly the same today. And so Tim can say, yeah, the feds need to do this and the states need to do that. And right now people aren't organized at a local level around the kind of vision we have to be able to advance a coherent message there. And what really has sort of guided me, that last point there, what doesn't get talked about then, what doesn't get talked about now, is like, oh, let's preserve this farmland and the conservation easement. Now the problem solved. No, how do we keep a viable local farm economy going? And local farm economy means farmers supplying any market segment, whether it's the neighbors down the street or some global market down the around the globe. Next slide. So the good news is my team has found a fiscal agent with the Will County Center for Economic Development, which traditional economic development agency. It's like a brand new kind of partner that could be brought into the mix to help us achieve our goals of scaling nature conservation in full cooperation with agriculture. And so we have put together I've assembled a team. We've applied for a grant to the Chicago Region Food System. Next slide. The bad news is we're competing with about 180 other groups for about $3.8 million in grants. So like Ann Hughes used to say, what doesn't get talked about is how do we have a local farm economy that survives in 20 years? Another thing that doesn't get talked about is how do all 180 groups have all their funding needs met so that the Chicago Region Food System Fund can achieve its mission? It's kind of like we need much, much more money. Next slide. And so what I think is real interesting here, my colleague John Stephen found this, that the Rockefeller Foundation, one of the big grant makers out there. They've been looking into food as medicine for 5 years, or regenerative food. And of the three components here, the most important one, from my view, in terms of the project that we're designing, is to support coalitions that connect policy implementation to local context. And so they're putting a lot of money out the door, but there's no systematic approach that is going to bring these kinds of things to scale to enable like local food systems to align with global supply chains, especially to enable regions to put agriculture on equal footing with other forms of economic development. Next slide. So, and that brings us to the Good Food for All. Last year, I was working with Will County board members, and we got a policy adopted by the National Association of Counties, which is elected officials from 3,000 plus counties around the country. And Will County board member Dan Butler and Judy Ogala, we put this thing together, and it was presented. The idea was presented as an emergency preparedness tool. We learned during COVID that when there was that brief time when the global or the big processing centers shut down and the people went into the grocery stores and were surprised to learn we didn't have the food. Well, how do we make that? It's on counties actually to figure out how to solve that problem. And I would say that today the emergency is a broken public resource delivery system. In this project, we want to create this local model with all the kinds of partners needed to bring it to scale. Next slide. So the NACHO, the National Association of City and County Health Officials. Here's another association. It's like, are they having a conversation with Rockefeller? Well, it turns out that Nacho was a spinoff from NACO 60 years ago, said, hey, we need to get our local public health officials working together. And so the project that we're envisioning here is a tri-county South Metro Chicago that would loop in Will, South Cook, and Kankakee counties. And the concept that we have that I'll get into in a second here is then in turn going to help Chicago Wilderness Alliance build out these kinds of relationships throughout our four state 38 county region, Lake Michigan Basin region. And the design of the project then would be something that the 4 states could bring forward around, next slide, around a coherent message. Now, it turns out that reaching out to Rockefeller, I think the point is we should be thinking about how we should be working with the Chicago Region Food System Fund and other grant makers to go to Rockefeller and say, hey, we're designing a 4-state project here, and we need your help. And oh, by the way, we started this, and 5 years ago, Rockefeller had put out applications, and in January of 2020, before times, before the Alliance had a Growing with Ag team, among other things, before anyone knew what COVID was, we had put together a proposal with the Will South Cook Soil and Water Conservation District as fiscal agent to try to develop this business plan. We were already envisioning the 4-state, 38-county region of Chicago Wilderness Alliance as a partner because we need to break through these kind of narrow channels. And I was just always impressed from the time I met Deb Shore years ago that Chicago Wilderness Alliance could be a good group. Next slide. So what we're looking at here is for the project that we're envisioning. We've applied for a grant. We'll find out in November. There's 4 components, and number 1 is with a media narrative, and by media narrative, it's like. So we want to highlight innovators. We want to produce a series of public reports presented to public venues. So like next week, I found that just the fact that the Will County, I was at a Will County Farm Bureau event a couple weeks back, and I mentioned that, working with this, the CED submitted an application. Just that gives us standing. So we're realizing rather than wait, we need to just kind of go full bore ahead. And with Tim speaking to the emergency at hand, all the more reason to do that and just sort of invest. My team is investing some of our own time to just get this thing going. But next week, I will be going next Thursday to the Will County Board Public Health Safety Committee. Dan Butler, the person who advanced the NACO policy, he chairs that committee. And I'm also going to be talking to the Forest Preserve District Board. Vice Chair Judy Ogala is very interested in this. And I'm envisioning like a monthly update of what we're doing, along with a whole bunch of other entities that could get that. So an agri-food asset mapping, then the community and business planning, and Ted's going to be talking about the business planning, and then moving towards comprehensive funding. Next slide. So Local Food Forum is a Substack column put together by Bob Benenson, and he's very interested in this project. His wife, they actually owned a farm in Will County, so they have like a lot of interest from there. But we're sort of looking at like regular content, and as things go, there should be a steady drumbeat as like weekly stories. There's no way with our funding proposal we'd be able to do that, but we need to be moving in that direction. Next slide. The core partner in this is actually going to be a spinoff of the Will County Health Department. MAP stands for Mobilizing Action for Planning and Partnerships. And it turns out that they are using a National Association of City and County Health Officials framework to develop this partnership. And it turns out that the hospitals, all to meet certain IRS requirements, have to submit some like a report to the Illinois Department of Public Health. So it led them, using the Nacho framework, they put together. So it's in Will County, it's led by the health department, using the convening power of government, really underestimated power of government at all levels. They use their convening power to bring together, through 4 committees, hospitals, um, social service agencies, food pantries, and the Northern Illinois Food Bank. And I've been active in the Food and Nutrition Access Group, and it's all about improving health outcomes for all Will County people. And they've just submitted a plan to the state, a 5-year plan, and it talks about scaling local food systems and, just helping to support a food forest or getting one farmer in is not really going to do it. We really need a more systematic approach. Next slide. Let's see. I'm so what do we have in mind? So I've got a couple folks who are involved in asset mapping, and this too, we don't want to come up with a definitive study. We want to look at a geography that starts from that serves multiple purposes. We're looking at South Cook, and it turns out that the Will South Cook Soil and Water Conservation District, their service area extends all the way up to 22nd Street, includes all of South Cook as well as Will County. It includes, and then the Kankakee Soil and Water Conservation District. So you have that geography. And then in terms of our core goal is helping to scale the Good Food for All projects, of the community food projects of the MAP Collaborative membership. We're looking at how do we connect Joliet to Englewood to Pembroke. So these are all African American communities doing a lot around food projects, but they don't talk. Just even to get them sort of on the same page would be a very valuable experience. And the agri-food asset mapping that we're looking to do, it begins with local food, but we really want to look at all things, at all production. So like when Tim is talking about the corn and soybean, hay, whatever else farmers are doing, let's begin to pull that content together, have an information clearinghouse where people can find it, so that others, like Kane County has an ag committee. Well, they, let them use this. Lake County, Lake County Community College is in the midst of doing a $19 million fundraise to do a local food urban center. Well, they can use the same concept as well. Next slide. So what do we want to do? It's providing the information as we go. The other part of it I meant to mention is that then you have 3 county farm bureaus, and part of that we also want to be sharing this content with. And we're going to have like food farmers who come from the small scale production, having them dialogue with the 3 county farm bureaus to build out an understanding, to connect up that what people are wanting to grow at a neighborhood scale really aligns. Our success at that level actually aligns with what commodity producers are doing as well. And so we want to create a methodology to pinpoint financial investment needs. That really struck a bell with Doug Pryor, the CEO of the Will County Center for Economic Development. I said, look, Doug, you got nine community bankers on your board. And it's sort of like we want to design a project here where you're creating a platform, a pathway for your community bankers to turn some of their neighbors into customers. It's like we just need this more comprehensive dialogue. So we begin with food projects. So there's a meat processing capacity. One of my colleagues who's got 50 years of experience in meat processing thinks there could actually be room for 2 small scale plants, one in northeastern Illinois, another in northwest Indiana. And then what other kind of value added processing is there? Industrial hemp seems to be an opportunity around brownfields, but there's just not much happening there. And people who are doing that work are doing it in their own kind of bubble and not connected to anything larger around the larger goal here. And then Claire Ship from American Farmland Trust, who she told me that like the U of I is looking at some of the perennial crops, and there's resources out there. Next slide. So what do we have here? I'm really struck when I learned that there was a news release in mid-July when one of the things that was created during the Biden administration, 12 regional food business centers, and our region is served by Michigan State University Center for Regional Food Systems. Same four states as the Chicago Wilderness Alliance. Well, again, one of the outcomes of this project will be to build a bridge between what we want to do to help nature conservation go to scale in partnership with ag with what the partners in that group do. Our field day last year in Northwest Indiana was with the Northwestern Indiana Food Policy Council, and they are actually one of the partners uh, they're one of the partners in the Midwest group that lost all their funding. Chicago Food Policy Action Council is been the liaison for Illinois, the Food Financing Institute in Wisconsin. So again, how do we begin to bring all those kind of constituencies together? And I pulled out this quote in particular because what it just really said is, where's the financial sector leadership here? There's no plan. Okay, well then let's us create the plan. Next slide. I've been in there was a USDA and the Federal Reserve Bank Community Development Department. They put together a study some years back, and the best thing that the most important point to me was the forward. We're like, we need a platform that gets all financial sector participants together in the same space, figuring out how we can collaborate and work together. Next slide. And that, by the way, was during Trump administration one. No one did anything. Well, so Illinois House Ag and Conservation Committee Chair Sonia Harper, she is beyond frustration with, I mean, Tim mentioned at the top about wanting to get state legislators. She's like, no, it's, I'm like, look, they managed to get a $2 million local food infrastructure grant program, and they had $24 million worth of applicants. It just, and now they're like going back and they fought like hell to get another 2 mil. And so I'm thinking, like, where's we need much more money than that. So Sarah Horner, I'm pleased from Compeer Financial is on the call. Thank you, Sarah, for being here. Last month I put together a meeting, introduced Rep Harper to Compeer Financial, and we were very pleased to discover that Compeer Financial, which serves a 3-state area, they have an emerging markets portfolio, and they are realizing for them to be able to achieve all the goals that they want to do. They have a congressional mandate to serve small farmers. They could really use state government establishing this kind of partnership. Next slide. So I met with Rep Harper the other night, and then yesterday she invited me to join. There was an Illinois Ag Equity Commission that was created through statute to uncover what the obstacles are especially for underserved, really under-resourced farmers, how they can get what all they need. And so Rep Harper yesterday formed a set of working groups. Number one is a local food finance working group. And I spoke up in public comments. Sarah, by the way, I shared, the highlights from our August 21st call and explained to these folks. They had people from the treasurer's office and people from all around the state that, we need to figure out that this working group report back to the Illinois Ag Equity Commission. We need to create a pathway for the community banks, for the philanthropy, for the impact investors to figure out what all the state government can be doing, how the federal government can be doing, but also with community and market actors right there from the get-go. So again, this project that we want to pilot, we begin generating content. And again, the agri-food asset map, that's going to be the thing that's going to provide the meat for Farm Credit, for Compeer Financial, to be able to lend their expertise in farm financing savvy to a discussion that will help the community banks figure out how to work not only with philanthropy on the grant making side, but in the investor side. What kinds of things could they be doing if they knew Farm Credit is doing that and the community banks are doing this, that kind of thing. So next slide. So it brings me to what are we doing? How do we begin to go forward? Tim and some others on this call we spoke out to the Regional Planning Commission some years ago about the importance of elevating agriculture. And they came out with a report. It's 4 years now. Grow Chicago. We need a goal here among one of the pillars of the regional economy needs to be to grow Chicagoland's agriculture. And nothing's happened on that because no one's charged with doing it. So the thought is, again, with this project, just want to be moving forward on this, finding ways, just jumpstart the conversation, get the funding to begin to put the project into motion. And I think we're going to find, just in closing, that we've got something really good here. Next slide. Because as Judy O'Gala was the first one, I'm actually an Evanston Democrat. She's a Will County Republican. And years ago, she says, this is something we can agree on. And then I the political Illinois playbook. It's a daily digest of news from around the state. Every day they have like a reader survey and like they put this question out there. And so, having the freedom to grow and share and distribute food, whether for free or for markets, is really something that we can all agree on. And I look forward to working with this group and others to move these ideas forward. So with that, any questions, thoughts? John Stephen, could you mention what you said about the Rockefeller Foundation and what Nuveen is doing? You mention that?
The Nuveen Fund is the Nuveen Company is started a fund dedicated to investment in regenerative agriculture, and it's at an unprecedented scale. It's $3 billion that they are going to be investing in farmers who are doing transitioning to organic or are already regenerative and organic or want to become organic and regenerative. So it's an unprecedented, increase in acceptance and focus on building out the regenerative agriculture market. And 3 billion is a drop in the bucket, but it used to be that that 3 billion was unheard of, and it hasn't happened in all these years until now. So it just shows that there's a huge wave of interest and investment, and I think something that's really going to fuel more of it is food is medicine. That's just going to increase the focus and the value, and as people more and more realize how that food is medicine, and so it's going to be grown that way and presented that way to us all. And and the local food system that Bob has been working so hard for so long to get organized so that it can develop and function in local systems across the country. There's wind in our sails to make it happen with funding. So we've got more work to do, but it's a big step forward to see this kind of capital committed to regenerative agriculture.
Thanks. One last point. The MAP Collaborative, the partnership that they're doing, their Food is Medicine project in Will County, is in partnership with the Will County Health Center. It's called a FQHC, a federally qualified health center. Federally qualified health centers are everywhere. They're everywhere. So again, yeah. So that becomes an essential kind of partner. So I'm just imagining, just coming out of this. I mean, I've got to get back to Rep. Harper and Sarah. I want to get back to you as well. That it's almost like maybe we need to be designing a Rockefeller grant application that basically encourages everyone working in this space to just find that common ground and you know, within this template of a you know, an agri-food asset map, a community planning, business planning process in that tri-county area to create this pilot for the National Association of Counties. They're waiting for some kind of, you know, once we have a funded project, NACO wants to put a story in their magazine about what they're doing. So again, it's thank you, Tim and Laura and Ted, for getting this whole Growing with Ag team going, because I think we do have wins at sales. Thank you. So
there's some things that make me hopeful too related to that, John and Bob. First is we're about to publish a paper that's part of our international branch of Farm Foundation, and we had part of it written by the head of sustainability at OSI. OSI is a food production company based out in West Chicago. They make the McDonald's hamburger, they make Chipotle's food, things like that. But anyway, their portion of this paper is about how they're not backing down on any of their sustainability standards or any of their desires to build a more regenerative and resilient food system, that despite these kinds of cuts, despite the challenges happening, they feel that this is the future, that they are building their business off of resiliency, which I think is extremely refreshing. And then McDonald's just announced a massive investment. I think it's around regenerative practices and beef. So I do think our corporate buyers of commodities are stepping up and are being more resilient and more supportive. And there is very much an interest in them in developing direct farmer relationships, that they want to do more contracting. They want to grow things where they're producing them. And so that is a bright spot for me. The other thing I want to say is Bob mentioned Kernza. If any of you are interested in Kernza, Kernza is perennial wheat that was developed by the Land Institute. We have a couple of acres of it growing on our farm in Libertyville. We're in year 2 of it. It actually made a small crop this year, although we're not harvesting it. It's a really interesting crop. It was challenging to get started. But once it was established, it's doing well. We're fighting a lot of weed pressure with it right now, but as it establishes itself, it actually pushes out other weeds. And so it requires 0 inputs. And we know that underneath the surface, it's growing 6 to 8 foot roots deep in the ground. And so we're excited about it. But if you want to see Kernza, reach out to me and I would love to have you on the farm.
That's great, Tim.
Amy, I think you're up.
And it,
Okay. Thanks, Ted. Ted had asked me to just share a couple of pieces of state legislation that are being, talked about, or I guess a couple of issues, and the possible proposed state legislation. So the first one, there was a piece of legislation that was introduced last year. It was pretty hastily introduced. It was really just modeled off of a piece of legislation that already exists in Minnesota. But it's a riparian buffer bill that would require perennial vegetation around or along riparian corridors. So there is a coalition of folks that are working on that. There was a meeting with some staff member from the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources to talk about how it was working there. And the last meeting that this coalition had, we talked significantly about what are the things related to our Illinois soil and water conservation districts that are different or maybe the same as in Minnesota, and what's sort of the legal authority that they have to be a regulatory agency and how are they set up. Also, with full recognition that our Illinois soil and water conservation districts are woefully underfunded. And so it can't really add legislation to their or a sort of mandated regulatory framework without also working alongside of them. So that's kind of where that bill sits right now. Prairie Rivers Network was the organization that was taking the lead. And so a lot of what we are thinking about now is um, how do we reach out to, we've been in touch with Elliott for the soil and water conservation districts, and we want to continue that conversation. But also taking a look at how is this being handled in Cook and the Collar counties that may be different from downstate Illinois, and reaching out to some of the drainage districts and soil and water conservation districts in DuPage, Lake, Will counties. So that is that piece of legislation. And before I move on to the herbicide drift, go ahead, Ted. Yes.
How do people get involved if they want to participate?
Probably the easiest is to send me an email and I will connect them, because I think Tessa and from Friends of the Chicago River and Robert from Prairie Rivers Network have been taking the lead, but I can connect people with that group. Yes. And I think we do need more people kind of thinking about this. Also thinking strategically as well. There's a group thinking about riparian habitat corridors, and having protected lands along rivers, and how does this piece tie in with that? But also, I know that there's also a wetlands coalition that's thinking about state legislation around protecting wetlands. So all of these, I think strategically, all of these groups need to think a little bit about how are they all working together. So. All right. If there's no other questions about that, I'll talk about herbicide drift. So this is again another area where in the state and actually probably in the country, Prairie Rivers Network has been taking the lead for several years in monitoring the impact of herbicide drift, so off-target herbicide damage, but not just but related to herbicide that volatilizes and moves off target as well. And seeing that impact, they have been looking at it in our state's natural areas and have been doing monitoring for probably 6 or 7 years now. As a result of those efforts and their constant reports to the Illinois Nature Preserves Commission, the IDNR and the Illinois Nature Preserves Commission had the Illinois Natural History Survey do their own study and they presented those results in 2024 to the Nature Preserves Commission that basically found herbicide drift damage and impacts in 90%, more than 90% of the natural areas that they visited, and they're seeing herbicide drift damage and impact to our state's natural areas as far as a mile away from the nearest agricultural field. It's not only an agricultural issue. This is also, the lawn care industry as well, but we are seeing significant impacts and significant damage to our state's natural areas. That's the issue that they are studying. We know people have said, what about the impacts to human health and how I can't speak to that, and Prairie Rivers Network doesn't speak to that, but we know there are groups also looking at that as well. So a couple of pieces, specific legislation that have been introduced in the past and we will continue to work on around this issue. One is to ban the ester formulation of 2,4-D. The ester formulation of 2,4-D is known to be the more volatile formulation of that product. So I believe Prairie Rivers Network is taking the lead on working with finding a sponsor again for that bill, whether it goes anywhere or not, but we need to continue to have the conversation. The other piece of legislation that is being worked on and was introduced last year, it did make it out of committee and then it died for some political reasons, and I think a lot of it is timing issues and how much time there was in the legislative session. But it is a bill that would require, prior to large scale applications of of herbicides and pesticides, that the applicator would need to make notice to schools and parks within a half a mile that they are making those applications. So it's not taking anything away, but it does require that notice be given to the administrators of schools and parks. Kim works at Prairie Rivers Network and works really closely on this issue. She and I have had a couple meetings with legislators. Obviously, we were working on it last year as well, and have also been talking about, is there potential of development of a tool, a mapping tool that would make it easy for large scale applicators to find all the schools and parks within a half a mile and the quick contact information for that. So we have been talking about that just in the last few weeks. So and that, as far as herbicide drift goes, those are the things that are immediately happening, but there continues to be work happening on it. Prairie Rivers Network continued their monitoring efforts again in 2025, and the results haven't, I mean, the short answer is the results haven't changed. We're still seeing it in a lot of places. At the Illinois Nature Preserves Commission meeting, they sent a letter to the governor in 2024 saying that we have enough information to act and we need to do something, but that has not led to any results at this point. So yeah, Ted.
Amy, a quick question. Is there a potential model in the way we run our burn plans for natural areas in this?
As far as notification?
Yeah.
Maybe, but the issue with the notification for burn plans, and I don't want to mess with that, but the burn plans, the notification frequently, an agency and organization will say, we may be burning sometime between, October 30th and January. And we want the notification to the schools and parks to be more
That day.
specific.
Yeah, okay.
And yeah, because we've asked for a specific time frame, because there are schools that, I mean, they should have the schools need to know ahead of time, should they be pulling kids inside on those days? And we also hope that when that happens, it's starting dialogue and awareness of, why didn't my kids get to go outside today for their normal recess? But I mean, they should know.
Amy, the initial reports coming out of the MAHA report was that it was going to go pretty hard on these insecticides, pesticides, herbicides, and then there was a sudden revision, and those things were walked back. Do you have any insight into what happened there?
I don't have any, I have suspicions and I have guesses, but I don't have any special insights. But I mean, I would imagine that, I mean, it's an incredibly powerful, I mean, even in our own state, just a few weeks ago, our own governor stood there in Tuscola and touted the sort of the, hey, we're bringing this chemical manufacturer will be here in Tuscola, Illinois, and Douglas County. Look at what that will mean for access to these tools here in central Illinois that will be good for our farmers. And so there's an incredible, I mean, I would imagine there's an incredible amount of political pressure, and there's a lot of money in these tools. That is my guess. But although I will say I had a really interesting conversation in Springfield with my own legislator, who is a Republican state senator, who said back to me back in April that her hope was that with Kennedy in his position, that we could have some real conversation about the impacts of these chemicals. And so it is that, even though nothing came out of the big report, the MAHA report, it did lead to some conversations on both, and I think Bob said, what are some issues we can agree on, both sides of the political aisle? I think having safe tools to use in agriculture is important to both sides.
I think there's a lot of hope too around FDA and USDA coming to agreement on CRISPR technology and being able to use gene editing to solve some big issues that we currently pretty ineffectively use these inputs for. And so some things have already come through. It's kind of amazing how many of these are moving now. They didn't move much during the Biden administration, so I'd say that's where some of my optimism is at, is that some of these high-tech tools can be employed to replace some of these things. Because, you know, to me, the herbicide drift, it really forces farmers to all comply to a single system of production. Because if you are an organic farmer, or you're an organic farmer not using the genetics of the company that your neighbor is using, then your fields are also in terrible danger. And I see it here in Will County. I've seen drift kill organic fields in significant numbers. So
yeah, I mean, I can only imagine based on my tiny garden in DeKalb County. I'm like, well, this plant shouldn't look like this. And I wonder what my neighbors did. So I can't imagine. Yeah. And I do think there is, you know, I think that there should be more of a push of, you know, using the tools that we have with CRISPR and with AI and with precision, being able to precisely target the things that we don't want to grow. We can do better than just spraying thousands and thousands of acres um, as a
and
preventative.
2,4-D is old technology. It's 1970s, if not 1960s technology.
Yeah.
Tim, did you want to bring up Liz's bullet point, or did you want me to? Well, I have it pulled up in front of me.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. So Liz Moran-Stalk at Illinois Stewardship Alliance wanted us at this portion of the meeting. She couldn't be here, but she wanted us to announce that the ISA is going to put out a survey for farmers and non-farm members to take that will be about the 2026 state policy agenda. Caucuses and committees are reviewing the issues that arose this year with farmers, and members and supporters will have an opportunity to take this survey on those issues next week until mid-October. So just keep an eye out for that survey if you're interested. And then the results of that will be approved and discussed at the agenda at their annual meeting on December 9th. So that's another way to kind of get at some of these things that we've been talking about today.
Great. Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Amy. Thanks, Bob.
And I think our time is done, Tim.
I think so. I think so. Thank you so much. I think that was a substantive discussion, and please reach out if you want to talk about other things. Our next meeting is coming up on.
Oh, here. Yeah, here.
It's in November.
November. There it is.
21st. And yes, work is still going on for the our ag trip next summer, and particularly thinking about doing something up in Lake County around Congress. So we'll talk more about that in November. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good weekend.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.